Hello and welcome from whatever part of the day you happen to be experiencing. Whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I'm glad you're here. I'm calling this How to Understand What the Heck Your Teachers Are Trying to Teach You. It's a virtual classroom where I'll explore different topics at different times. Today's topic is going to be about the story mountain or plot chart, which I'm sure you've seen. It looks something like that. That is not the shape I'm going to ask you to remember, but it's the one I'll put down for now. The real question I want to get to is why? Why do you think you need to know about a story mountain or a plot chart? And I can give you at least 3 quick reasons for that, although there are more. But first and foremost is we do know for a fact that story mountains, when you understand them and the way they work, they do help with your understanding. And forgive my terrible handwriting, but that's the way I came out of the box. We also know that students who really do have a grasp of the story mountain also tend to become better writers. And I'll get to why that is too. Finally, and probably most important, it is a great way to get your teachers and parents off of your back. Because if you can learn this formula and it helps to make you a better reader and writer, your parents are going to see better grades and they're going to be a lot happier with you, and it'll make life a lot easier. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. I've got a little racing to do, so bear with me and I'll get to the point. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little story because the story is kind of important. Let's talk about making cookies. I know that doesn't seem like it has anything to do with this stuff, and it probably really doesn't, but I'm going to make it somehow anyway. Cookies. We all love cookies. Here's little cookies, chips all over mine, maybe a couple M&Ms in there, and probably some walnuts. So one thing I sometimes ask kids is if I go into my kitchen, I grab a whole bunch of random things. I grab, let's say, a stick of butter. That's not looking too good, but it's butter. And I go and I grab a carton of, let's say, milk. And I grab some salt. And I take all these items together and I throw them into an oven and bake at 400 degrees. Am I automatically going to get cookies? And of course they laugh and they say, no, that's not going to happen. So then I happen to ask, well, what if I happen to grab the correct ingredients instead of random ingredients? I actually get the butter I need, and I get the oil, and I get an egg, and I get some other things that seem to be appropriate to making cookies. Am I going to automatically get cookies by sticking them inside the oven? And the answer to that frequently is a big fat no. And when I ask them why, they often tell me I need to follow a recipe. That there are certain amounts of flour, certain amounts of oil or eggs and things that I need to put together and then bake at the correct temperature in the oven, and I will get, let's say it's 350, I will get what I want, my cookies, okay? Which more and more as I talk about it, I kind of want them now. But the whole point is that there's a formula that you follow and you end up with the correct item. It turns out writing is very much the same thing. When you are experiencing a story written by somebody else, or you're sitting down to begin to write a story, a personal narrative of some kind, you are trying to get to this point. You're trying to follow a formula that will result in, not cookies, but a really well-written story that people had fun with or were scared by and enjoyed in some way, and you got a big fat A+ on it, and you could bring it home and show your mom and dad, and you could say, hey mom, hey dad, get off my back now. So that's kind of our goal. We're going to take a look at how to get there by understanding what a story mountain is on the next slide. Welcome to slide 2, the plot diagram. If you're looking, you'll see it's a very busy slide, but it will be something I'll work on and explain. The shape you see is not the one I drew for you originally. That one did look something like that, more of a balanced mountain. And the one here on the right isn't even really the one I like to teach to my students. The version I think is probably best is to think about a long line beginning, then a steep upward slope, followed by a little drop off, and then a small line going off of that. So it looks like sort of half a mountain as opposed to a full mountain, or at least a mountain with a giant cliff. That shape is the one that typically most authors follow in short stories, books. It's very familiar if you watch any type of movie.
And I'll go over exactly how this particular shape is better than either this one or the one here to the right. But let me just get a little erasing done. Down below, you're going to see a couple different labels. There's some in gray and there's some in yellow. The gray ones I'm going to begin with, and I'll jump into the yellow ones in a minute. So on the bottom, we see these different little labels, and they say things like setting, 5Ws, rising action, exposition. They're not all the labels I could have used, but they're the ones I want to go over. Any story typically begins with what's called the exposition. Exposition, I sometimes tell my students, is just the explaining part. Who do I need to know about in a story? What's going on with them? Where did it happen to them? And when did it happen to them? It's also included, or includes, I should say, the setting, and I sometimes refer to it as the 5Ws. Again, who, what, when, where, and why. And all of that comes at the beginning because you're asking your reader or your listener, if you're telling the story out loud, to understand just the basics of who's involved in the story, when it happened, where it happened, and what happened to them. Two more key ideas I want you to keep in mind about the exposition. Usually you're going to get some type of story hook in your exposition. And the story hook is kind of what it sounds like. You're trying to hook the reader into continuing on with your story. It can be the problem in the story. It could just be some very clever opening to the story. The other thing about exposition is the length can be tricky sometimes. If I'm reading something that is a short story, I might get the exposition within 1 to 2 paragraphs. It might be drawn out a little bit longer than that. But usually, after a couple of paragraphs, I have the 5Ws in hand. Who it's about, what it's about, when and where, and maybe why or what's happened. If I'm reading something like historical fiction or a novel, it can take much longer for the author to get all the exposition out in front of you to basically explain everything that you need to understand to be able to get into the story and follow it well. So those are things you want to keep in the back of your head, that exposition can vary, but most often you're going to get it pretty early within a few paragraphs. If it's a short story, and if it's a book, you should be able to get it within a few pages, a rough idea of the key players and all the things you need to know. Following that, we begin to adjust into what's called rising action. So rising action is pretty much what it sounds like. The action in the book hopefully rises in some way. It either gets more intense if it's some type of action book that you're reading. It might get scarier if you're reading something that's creepy. It may also get more romantic if you're reading something about relationships between two characters who seem to really like one another. The point is to keep the events going up a little bit more in some type of interest level or intensity. And as that goes on, each one progressing, they might get over one conflict and be confronted with a next conflict. They've got to do another conflict after that. Everything getting and building up towards sort of one dramatic moment. And that one dramatic moment is often called the climax. And the climax is just simply the biggest part of the story, the most intense part. If you're reading a long novel, it's sort of going to happen toward the end. It's the big thing you've been waiting all those hundreds of pages you've been reading to get to. If you're watching a movie, and let's say, again, it's a superhero movie, Spider-Man has been fighting a bunch of, let's say, robbers on the street to begin the movie. Maybe he takes on one sort of powerful villain halfway through the movie, but the real climax comes at the end when Spider-Man is at his absolute worst. Maybe something has gone wrong, his webbing is gone, he's stuck in a tight position, he's got to decide between saving somebody he cares about and saving a whole group of people he doesn't know. But it becomes the most dramatic part of the movie that you've been sitting for an hour and a half waiting to happen. And once that happens, you get what's called falling action. And it, like rising action, it's exactly what it sounds like. There is action that continues on, events continue to happen. However, they're just not as intense or exciting as what you saw for the climax. Again, going back to a Spider-Man movie, when Spider-Man makes this decision and he goes and he saves, let's say, all the people instead of saving his girlfriend, he may not have made the choice that you wanted, but he made a choice and it was dramatic and it was thrilling to see happen. But everything after that is sort of what we call the fallout. It's, well, okay, now he's got to live with the decision he made. But the movie tends to end rather quickly after that. And so it goes back to that little chart I was telling you about, that drawing. You get a lot of exposition, you get a lot of build up to some big important part of the story, the climax. You get a little bit of action after that. And then you get this little ledge, which kind of ties up any other little loose endings that weren't covered during the climax or the build-up. But a movie or a story often ends very quickly after that. And I'm going to explain why by breaking up this little chart into thirds, but I'm going to choose a little different color here. So if you're looking at this story map, which we are, you'll notice I have 3 sections now. First section, second, third. Oh, thirds, there we go. All of the first third tends to be our exposition. You get a lot of rising action happening in the next part, and all of that is building its way up to a climax, which happens in the third part of the story. If it's a play, we call it the third act, and it's a common phrase, and really it just means you get to find out what happens and what the payoff is for everything you've been following. Almost all stories follow this recipe, this formula, building up to something big at the end. And the reason for that is if they did it some other way, and it does get done another way sometimes, but not that often, if they were to put the climax at the very, very beginning of the story or the movie, then you're getting the most exciting part up front, which seems awesome. But what are you doing for the rest of the movie that you're sitting through or the rest of the book that you're reading? You're basically reading things that are not as exciting. They're not as thrilling, they're not as romantic, whatever it is that you're reading. And so you end up spending a lot of time kind of wasting your time, not getting anything that really excites you. Hopefully we have now a better understanding of the recipe that goes into these stories. I've given you the key parts your teachers want you to know: resolution, exposition, rising action, climax, and falling action. Let me put it to a practice situation. I'm going to tell you a story from my life. Maybe you'll find it amusing. I do now because it happened so long ago, but it was an embarrassing moment at the time it happened. So the story goes something like this, and that's what the yellow little bands are for at the bottom. When I was younger, in 7th grade, I had a friend of mine, his name was Matt, and he had dared me one day to show off for a couple of girls who lived down the street from where we were. We could see them from where we were standing. The girls were seated out in the front porch. And they were both older than I was, but they were the same age as my friend. My friend was older. So this was sort of a big deal for me to have to go and show off. But I got talked into it, and I decided I'd go ahead and do it. My idea, my brilliant idea, was that I would do a wheelie all the way down this road, which was a very high hill leading all the way down to the bottom where the girls were. And this would be so impressive to them that they would invite the two of us over to talk. So I went ahead and I popped a wheelie. So you'll see I'm starting to build up the action. We went from talking about doing something to I actually went and did it. Now, once I get my wheelie going, which I was actually very good at, I'll say that, I start flying down this hill. And as I'm approaching an intersection, there is a car coming directly toward me, and I know that that driver really doesn't see me too well. They're focused on getting through the intersection, and I'm coming at a very quick, different direction. As it turns out, while I'm sweating it out and I'm worried that I'm going to either hit the car or the car is going to hit me, I get lucky. The driver looks at me, stops suddenly, and then honks the horn. So, crisis averted, but you'll notice a little more action is going on. The hero, I'm going to make myself the hero here, even though it won't turn out that way, the hero is almost in danger at one point. I go zipping by the car and the angry driver, and the honking horn actually kind of works to my advantage, because what happens is the girls notice me now. They're looking and they're seeing me, and I'm thinking, well, this is terrific. Everything is going exactly according to plan. I'm passing over a bridge at this point, which goes over a highway. And a bridge, as you'll probably know, tends to have sidewalks on both sides with very steep granite curves, and then there's some type of metal fencing on each side. And so it's an area where there's no soft spots. The reason that's important is because suddenly, unexpectedly, and literally true, my front wheel falls off. So I'm in a precarious position. I don't know what to do. I watch my wheel literally roll away from me, and I'm sort of agog at what I need to do. Panic sets in very quickly at that point. What I probably should have done was just let my bike coast on all the way down the road until I could find a grass area to throw myself onto, or just ride it out on my one wheel, which I did tell you I was pretty good at riding on, and slow down to a point where I could get off the bike. But no,
I didn't do that. What ends up happening is I have to make a quick decision and I make the wrong one. I decide that I am going to have my front forks go down onto the tar, and in my mind, I'm going to just slide with maybe some cool sparks really slowly to a stop. And as you can probably imagine, nothing like that at all happened. What actually happened was I went sailing over those handlebars. Now, if this were something you could view yourself, and it was a movie of some kind, you'll notice I've worked all the events all the way up to a very critical decision point, and that is the climax. When I am deciding what I'm going to do for myself, whether I coast on or I put the front forks down, that is a very key decision moment. I make the wrong one and I go over the handlebars. Right that second, the minute I've made that decision, you know what the outcome is because I'm sailing over those handlebars. We are all heading toward falling action. Nothing is probably going to be more exciting than that. And as it happens, it really wasn't that much more exciting, although it was pretty funny and embarrassing, of course, because what happens is I go sliding to a pretty grotesque stop where my shirt gets ripped, I have pebbles all up and down my arm, I have scratch marks, and the girls, of course, are sort of stuck in a precarious position themselves. They don't know whether to laugh or be horrified, and they're kind of giving me both looks. I jump up embarrassed, and I don't feel the pain immediately, but I see them coming at me. They're both laughing and very worried. And so I'm thinking I'm going to shrug this off. It's no big deal, ladies. I do this all the time, but of course I know better than that. And the pain does start, and I see the blood, and I'm thinking, oh boy, this is not very good. Well, I'm going to give you a little more falling action, and then the resolution. What happens is that stupid, embarrassing moment of mine kind of worked out. The girls insisted on bringing me into the house and treating me and cleaning me up. And so I was probably there for a good hour, hour and a half, while my friend Matt never actually got inside the house. He sort of gave up and went home and picked up my bike for me, which was kind of nice, even though he set me up in the first place. And the end of this whole thing is, sorry, I got these out of order. The girls helped me recover, and we end up becoming friends. I mean, all of us. We all got to know each other. And of course, it went on for years where everybody would remind me of the day that, my front wheel had fallen off and I wiped out in front of the house. So, looking at this story you see in front of you, it's a real life story, and it does follow the same formula that your teachers tend to work on with you. There was exposition. I talked about myself and Matt, and that I was in 7th grade. I just said it was in my neighborhood. You're getting the setting, you're getting the who, what, when, where, why. I was dared to do something. There's your hook. There's also the initial part or hint at the problem coming up. I pop a wheelie, everything's fine. A car comes. I get my first little conflict. It's not a big one, but it's a conflict. I'm worried I'm going to get hit by the car, or the car's going to hit me. I continue on through that one little problem. Everything looks okay. The front wheel falls off. This is the whole point to my story about the embarrassing moment that happens. I make a wrong choice. I wipe out embarrassment city, pain city, but then it's followed by a friendship. So it does work out in the end. But again, if you're looking at this in thirds, you'll see I spent time getting exposition going for you. There was a buildup of events, and then it's in the last third, or sometimes called the third act, when I go ahead and give you the big payoff for the story and how it all ends. Although it's not necessary, if you want, you can continue on to slide 3. Slide 3 is basically a big recap of everything I've explained about the story mountain. The reason I went on to a third slide is because if you're someone, kind of like me, I need the repetition to really understand something. So sitting and even listening to it in class might not be enough. I need to go back and see something like a video or read more about it. And then I might actually have to read something else or see something else before it really sinks in well. So if you are one of those, you're somebody like me and you want a little bit more information and a little more repetition on this to learn it, head on over to slide 3 and it should get you all set up. Otherwise, thanks a lot for checking out this virtual classroom, and hopefully it's been helpful to you. A bit long, I know, but hopefully helpful. Take care.
Story mountain you're looking to keep in your head looks like this. You'll notice how long the beginning is. It's exposition. It takes a lot of time to explain who your characters are, where things happen, why or what is going to happen to them. You want to get to the 5 W's. Okay? Setting is also there. You're taught about setting. You've got to pay attention to that. Often you get a conflict early on and a hook. Pull the reader in. Give them a reason to keep reading. Then start to lay out what are the events that happen to the characters and how do they get a little more intense or interesting than the event before until you get to the tippity top of that mountain and something climactic, something amazing or interesting or powerful happens. And then give them a couple of events after that, explain what happens, and try to tie up any other ends that you have to your story, and maybe let readers know how things turned out for your characters. But again, the shape is not a full mountain, but part of a mountain. You're building up to a big ending. Another way I sometimes explain it to my students is I just tell them or ask them, how interested would you be in going to a movie about, let's say, Spider-Man or Batman, and watching Batman fight his deepest, darkest foe about an hour into the movie, where the middle of the movie is. And then the rest of the movie is less amazing, and he fights smaller crooks and people not as powerful. And you learn about the things he does every day, like how he's got to clean up his suit sometimes because it gets all sweaty or ripped up or bloody. You're not going to enjoy that. That's 1 hour of excitement followed by another hour of kind of boring stuff. So all movies, if you're paying attention, TV shows, the books you read in short stories, they follow this formula. A lot of setup, get the events built up, and then at the very end, the final third of the movie, the final third of the story, give the people what they want, get something exciting that happens, and then give a couple more falling events and tie everything up. So there you go. Hopefully now you have enough information about a story mountain to get your teachers off your back, your parents off your back, and now you understand what the heck they're talking about. Thanks a lot, and hopefully you enjoyed the video. Take care.